Hello, everybody. If you can hear me, it would be lovely for you to send me a message and say hi or wave or send a heart or whatever this Thursday evening, 8:30. It's David Dawson here, speaking to you from leafy Oxfordshire, just on the outskirts of... Hi, Louise. Hi, Vicky. Oh, that's good. It's reassuring. It means that things are working. Yes, so, yep, you can see and hear me. That's even better. Hi, adios. Ah, wow, that's wonderful. Wow. Yeah, I'm just outside Oxfordshire in the UK, in a place called Thame, an old market town, famous for various Civil War battles in the past, but more famous, more recently, for being the location for Midsummer Murders. Many of the shots or the external sequences that you will have seen if you are an avid viewer of Midsummer Murders, and in fact of some of the old Inspector Morse series, were filmed around here in Thame. Obviously, during these strange and bizarre times, we're not actually seeing very much in that regard. Everything's very quiet on the streets of Thame, and we're all social distancing. But hopefully one day, we'll be able to see the film crews back out again, the tourists coming here to see where several of the scenes were shot, including my favourite place in all the world, here in Thame, Rums's Chocolate Shop, where you can stand outside looking through the window and see them making handmade chocolates. It is just gorgeous. Anyway, one day, maybe we'll be back to a semi-kind of normal. I'm also speaking to you from my living room, which doubles as the studio in this house. During the day, my partner is here at his piano, here, as you hear it, where he leads various choirs, gives virtual singing classes to people, and also composes his mini musicals. And you may have seen me posting about the mini musicals that Luke writes, which have been gorgeous. During the lockdown, he's obviously not been able to see his choirs in person, but what he's been able to do is launch a phone service for them so they can keep in touch. It's called Heart to Heart. And we've heard so many wonderful stories through Heart to Heart that he's turned them into some mini musicals, which I've narrated. I'll send out the links again, if that's not too cheeky, in this group at the end of this, because Luke's done an amazing job. Anyway, back to me and books. And what I'm planning to do is this evening to read to you from two of my books. One, Heroes in Love, and you can see the very discreetly placed banner behind me for the book. It's my latest one, published by Burroughs from California, publishing house in California. And then after that, I'm going to read to you from For the Love of Luke. Now, I'll tell you the story about that and my partner Luke a little later. So let me get on to Heroes in Love. Heroes in Love, yes, I would say was my first true romance, I suppose, that I wrote. I'd been writing suspense, mystery suspense, romantic suspense before that. And then the publisher I was then with said, could you try writing a romance? And I was terrified of that, but I thought, okay, I'll give it a go. And Heroes in Love emerged from that. It's the story of Billy, who is a 30-something-year-old, 31, I think he is. God, it's been a while since I wrote it. Guy who lives in London, is now a social worker, but used to be an actor in soap operas and on commercials on TV. That was until his mother got ill with cancer and he gave up working in order to be able to look after her. And then he retrained as a social worker and is now caring for people in the community. And Billy actually crashes into a chap called Daniel. And Daniel is a musical theatre director but he's a special kind of musical theatre director. He works with children with different abilities. And so he's not a West End musical star director, but he works with, again, in the community. And the two really kind of hit it off. But they, at the same time, are not certain of each other. Billy hasn't had a boyfriend for a long time. Neither's Daniel, for reasons which we discover during the reading of the book. What I thought I'd read to you is the time that Billy first goes back to Daniel's house. And we're kind of, will they, won't they, get it together that night. Daniel's house was one of many small Victorian houses in a long, tree-lined street alongside Battersea Park. The weathered wooden entrance door creaked as Daniel pushed it open to reveal a darkened hall. He flicked a switch, and the hallway was transformed into what looked like the side gallery of a music museum. I'll pause here because I realised my vanity means I forgot to put my reading glasses on, which is why I was hesitating then. Let's try it, the next paragraph. Ah, that's better, I can see it now. Bizarre musical instruments hung from the ceiling. Music manuscript pages festooned the walls at jaunty angles, and everything was lit dramatically by carefully hidden lighting. Billy stood in the doorway and admired this work of art. Although the entrance hall was simple and high-ceilinged, someone's careful and imaginative design had made it beautiful. The modest front door through which they entered hadn't prepared him for this at all. Daniel turned to look at the expression on Billy's face. "You like?" he asked. "My friend Maggie did it for me a couple of years ago. Wait until you see the rest of the place." Billy stepped into the house and closed the front door behind him. He followed Daniel down the hallway to a sweeping arch on the left. Daniel flicked another switch, and spotlights illuminated a baby grand piano in the middle of what looked like the perfect recreation of a Victorian drawing room. Above the marble fireplace was a magnificent gold-framed mirror. In the bay window of the room was a ruby-red chaise longue, its seat dressed with satin cushions. An aspidistra in a large porcelain bowl sat on top of a tall mahogany plant stand. "I feel distinctly underdressed," said Billy. "Can you wait while I go back to get my smoking jacket and silver cigarette holder?" Daniel laughed. "She's done a great job, hasn't she? Very resourceful is our Maggie, all for less than 400 quid. Billy's jaw dropped open. "Surely not including the piano?" Daniel nodded. "Oh yes, even the piano. Maggie found out some recording studio had gone bust, and she jumped in quick to see what she could get. She's the world's greatest collector." Daniel crossed to the piano and sat at the keyboard. He started to play, and the room was filled with a Chopin etude. After a few bars, he paused and switched to a ballad. Billy felt sure he knew its haunting lyrical tune, but couldn't recall its name. He unhitched his rucksack and put it on the floor. Then he walked across the room to lean on the piano to watch Daniel play. "That's beautiful," Billy said. "I'm sure I've heard it before. It's from a musical, isn't it?" Daniel nodded. "One of my guilty pleasures. Composed by the Sherman Brothers in 1968 after their success with Mary Poppins, one of the greatest British musicals of all times." He looked up at Billy as he played. "Giving you a clue?" Billy shook his head. Daniel paused once more and looked down at the keyboard. Then the main theme from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang filled the room. Billy laughed. "Okay, I know that show," he said. "But I don't know the song you played before. Is it from Chitty?" "Yes, it is." Daniel shook his head in mock disappointment. "You don't know your musicals, do you? I sense a compatibility problem on the horizon." Daniel resumed playing the ballad once more. "It's Lovely, Lonely Man." He continued for a few more bars and then stopped and looked up at Billy. I don't know why. It came into my head, and somehow it seemed appropriate. He stood up and walked around the piano, placed his hands on Billy's shoulders and leant his head forward until their foreheads touched. Daniel's eyes stared intently for a moment, and then his face crinkled into a smile. "That's a lie," he said. "I know exactly why I played it. Come on, let's go and make some coffee." Daniel's kitchen was filled with a jumble of antiquated cooking gadgets accumulated from different eras in the history of domesticity. An ancient blackened stove stood in the chimney alcove. Next to it, an oversized American retro blender perched precariously on a mottled red Formica work surface, alongside a vintage 1930s toaster. A Victorian clothes dryer hung from the high ceiling above an antique pine table. The walls were covered with framed pictures, mostly collections of actors smiling from bygone West End productions. Every surface seemed cluttered with either elaborate culinary equipment or music manuscripts. Billy looked around him in awe. The house was narrow, but extended a long way back. There seemed to be so much space. "Can I ask a cheeky question?" "You mean, how can I afford this?" replied Daniel. "I know. I'm lucky. My grandfather left it to me. This was where I ran to when I left my parents and came to London. Grandpa Bob was the world to me. He was my mum's father, and the dad I never had." "It must be worth a fortune now," said Billy. "Three-bedroom terrace house in desirable Battersea?" Daniel turned to the worktop and opened a cupboard in front of him. "I suppose it is. But it means more to me that this was Grandpa Bob's home. Lots of the things I have here were his." He turned back to Billy. "I said coffee, but would you prefer tea?" Daniel crossed to the stove, picked up a large whistling kettle and carried it to the sink. "Have you got mint tea?" Billy asked. "Ooh, there's fancy." Daniel filled the kettle. "Give me a second and I'll gather some leaves from the garden. Peppermint or spearmint?" "Now it's my turn to say, 'Ooh, there's fancy,'" Billy said. "I've got no idea, but probably peppermint." Daniel set the kettle down on the stove and lit the gas. He picked up a pair of scissors from the dresser, crossed to the back door and undid 2 heavy bolts. "Come and have a look at the outside space Maggie created for me," he said. "It's inspired by Edward Scissorhands, very Tim Burton-esque." Daniel swung open the door. He reached through the open doorway and flicked a switch. Billy could see a hazy glow of twinkling lights beckon him into the mysterious space beyond the threshold. He crossed the kitchen and stood at Daniel's side. "I'll turn off the house lights." Daniel switched off the kitchen light, and Billy waited for his eyes to adjust to the sudden darkness. The scene before him slowly revealed itself. Leading away from the kitchen door, he saw an avenue of sculpted shrubs, each festooned with tiny lanterns. The pathway seemed to be endless, disappearing into the far distance. On either side of the doorway were 2 Victorian lampposts. A flickering yellow light illuminated huge glass globes on top of the wrought iron posts. Billy stepped across the threshold into the garden. The ground felt soft beneath his feet. He squatted down and gently brushed the palm of his hand over its mossy surface. His nostrils were filled with the scent of chamomile. Billy looked back over his shoulder. Daniel stood smiling in the doorway. "This is how I keep sane in this city of madness." Billy stood and walked further into the garden. After a few yards, he came across a break in the avenue of shrubs. It revealed a small, half-walled patio lit by 2 more wrought-iron lanterns. They spilled yellow, flickering light onto 2 chairs and a neat glass-topped table. Suspended on the walls around the patio were earthenware pots in which grew many different types of herbs. Daniel appeared at Billy's side with the scissors in his hand. "I've come to get you your tea." Billy felt as if he'd been transported into a film set. The distant rumble of London's nighttime traffic was masked by recorded birdsong. His senses were overwhelmed by the magic of Daniel's West London wonderland. "It's beautiful," Billy said. "It's so tranquil. Surely this must have cost a fortune to build." Daniel shook his head. "I told you before, Maggie's resourceful. It's all smoke and mirrors. Well, mostly mirrors. She works as a designer on film sets. That's when she can get the work. When the production team's finished with the props, she spirits them away to this little project. It's a work in progress." Daniel bent down to the chamomile lawn. "I'm afraid it's mostly fake, but it's quite realistic, like the hedge topiary. She weaves real plants in amongst the artificial. and it's pretty well impossible to work out what's real and what's not. She's a genius. He walked across to the wall of herbs and harvested a handful of mint leaves. Billy continued down the avenue of shrubs. He quickly discovered why Daniel had used the phrase smoke and mirrors. The apparent infinite length of the garden was created by an enormous mirror 20 yards in front of him. As he walked towards it, he could see his own reflection as he approached. "I haven't switched on the mist," Daniel said. "The pump needs some fixing. If I did, the romance here would have been overpowering." Billy turned as Daniel stopped behind him. He held a handful of mint leaves to Billy's nose, and Billy inhaled deeply. "Peppermint," said Daniel. "I hope I made the right choice." He lowered his arm, hooked it around Billy's waist, and pulled him closer. He leaned forward and kissed Billy slowly on the mouth. Daniel's lips parted as he said quietly, "Shit." He dropped his arm, reached into his front pocket, and pulled out the scissors. "I wasn't planning on giving myself a circumcision tonight." Daniel let the scissors and the handful of mint fall to the ground. He wrapped his arms around Billy and pulled him close. Suddenly they were kissing, wildly, passionately. Daniel placed his hand on the back of Billy's neck, holding the two men close as their tongues hungrily explored each other's mouths. He wrapped his arm tight around Billy's waist and slipped his hand down Billy's back to push their groins closer together. Billy had never felt such immediate connection with a man before. Daniel was both passionate and tender. So many men he had met simply behaved like sexual animals. Encounters with them would start promisingly, but soon they'd slip into cliched actions copied from a badly made porn movie. But Daniel was different. One moment he was kissing Billy with a passionate urgency, and his raw aggression filled Billy with a sense of sexual danger. The next moment, Daniel was gently sliding his tongue across Billy's stubble, or tenderly kissing him on his forehead, on his eyes, or his nose. Finally, Daniel slipped his hands onto Billy's shoulders, and the two men stood with their foreheads touching, their eyes locked on each other in an unblinking gaze. "Do you still want that mint tea?" "Maybe I'll have coffee after all," said Billy. "I'd like to stay awake tonight." In contrast to the eclectic assembly of period design and unusual furniture in the rest of the house, Daniel's bedroom was a shrine to minimalism. The bare floorboards were sparsely covered by two raw cotton mats, which lay either side of a king-size bed. The bed was the only substantial piece of furniture in the room. There were no cupboards, no wardrobe. Suspended on the wall behind the bed was a Chinese lacquer screen. Lamps concealed behind it cast a warm glow over the walls. Billy stood in the doorway and looked around at the simplicity of the space. Daniel was already in the bedroom, standing at the foot of the bed. "I didn't let Maggie near this room," he said, as though he felt he needed to give an explanation. "It's my sanctuary from the world. I needed to keep it simple, to keep it still." Billy was surprised by Daniel's sudden change in manner. He seemed hesitant, almost nervous. "Are you sure about this?" Daniel asked. "It's been a while for both of us. And I know, well, some guys don't like to rush into things on the first date." "Second date," Billy interrupted. "And yes, it's been a while for both of us. Isn't that all the more reason?" He crossed the threshold and stood opposite Daniel at the end of the bed, took hold of his right hand and intertwined their fingers. "In the last few months," Billy began, "I've learned we have precious few moments of happiness in this world. Since Mum got sick, I've come to understand how much time I've wasted in the past." He kissed Daniel on the lips. When their mouths separated, Billy rested his forehead against Daniel's and looked into his eyes. "What's the point of some elaborate Victorian courtship? This feels right." Billy's hand brushed against the front of Daniel's jeans, and he smiled. "Seems like someone else feels it's right as well." Daniel gently rolled his forehead against Billy's. His eyes twinkled. "Wow, Mr. Walsh, I do declare." Daniel spoke in a faux southern US accent. "I feel it only right for me to show you a little gentlemanly hesitancy, and now you seek to take advantage of me." Billy tipped his head back and let out an explosive laugh. "Me? Take advantage of you?" He looked behind him. You brought me upstairs to the bedroom. And that's a really good name for it. You haven't got another stick of furniture in it. Only one bloody great... He was cut short as Daniel pushed him firmly. Billy's feet slipped and he fell back onto the bed. Daniel landed beside him. Well, what else do you need in a bedroom? Daniel asked, and he leapt astride Billy. He grabbed Billy's wrists and pinned them firmly against the pillows on either side of his head. This bedroom's strictly for the two S's, he continued. Sleep and sex. And I'm certainly not sleepy. Billy was caught off guard by Daniel's strength and agility. The last man he'd wrestled with regularly was Jason, but that had ultimately turned nasty. Jason was tall and strong, and he'd insisted on taking a dominant role. Billy preferred his sex partners to be versatile. Daniel held onto Billy's wrists firmly. His biceps flexed as he lowered his upper body until their mouths were mere inches apart. I hope you're not going to lie there all passive on me, he whispered. His warm breath brushed provocatively against Billy's lips. I need you to know I look for equality in all aspects of my life, and that includes sex. And I'll stop there because I understand that I have to keep this above the waist or clean, or I have to make sure it's not X-rated. So it goes on, as you can imagine, and they get it on. And they're two of the nicest guys I've ever written about, I have to say. And, oh, hang on, I'm looking through my comments. Please put the links in the... We adore links. Right, okay, we'll do. That's a very professional looking setup. It's the front room, darling. Thank you, Ali. I think that's so sweet. I'll take these things off. Yeah, it's the front room, honestly. And what can I show you? There we are. There's the fireplace. Actually, if I tilt this down, I don't know. There's Luke's keyboard, which he uses during the day. This has sort of become permanently the studio now in the house. So it's a bit like Maggie in Heroes in Love. It's all smoke and mirrors. David, huge question. Morse or Endeavour, which is better? Oh my goodness. Well, I'm so old, Jack. I actually preferred Inspector Morse. And actually I preferred John Thor so much. I thought he was just the most brilliant actor. So I'd go for Morse. But actually Endeavour was shot around here as well, around Tame. All right, I'm going to flick through these comments. You're so vain. I bet you thought, yeah, all right, okay. I think that might be a reference to the glasses. I tell you what, originally I was going to wear these ones to read. And then Luke told me I looked like Dame Edna Everage and threatened to leave if I carried on wearing them. So I've had to wear these more discreet ones. He's got a piano there too. Yeah, that's right. Looks posh. Yeah, dead posh, darling. Hang on. I cried when John Thor died. Yeah. Have you ever read Sheila Hancock's autobiography? It's gorgeous. And it's so sad, but it's a really beautifully written. I think she is the most amazing person. And hearing her on Just a Minute or hearing her interviewed, she is so elegant, articulate, witty, intelligent, thoughtful, an amazing person. And she was also very lucky to have him as a husband for quite a long time. These readings get better and better. Oh, thank you, darling. Mine was dog roughing. Oh, for goodness sake. For goodness sake. You're just fishing for compliments there now, Ali. No, that's not true at all. I'm feeling slightly inferior on it. Oh, for goodness sake, Louisa. Oh, love Endeavour. All right, okay. I won't say too much against it, but what other crime authors' TV shows inspire you, David? Ian Rankin, Frost, Cracker. I like, I know this is quite funny, but I like Agatha Raisin, MC Beaton, and the Scottish detective that she wrote about, whose name I can't for the life of me remember, Hamish Macbeth. That's right, Hamish Macbeth. I enjoyed those. And The other, I really enjoy Dorothy L. Sayers, bizarrely, I know. I, not so long ago, finished a really good mystery stories. Yeah, it's a crime story, I guess, really, which is called The Affair of the Porcelain Dog. And I've forgotten entirely the name of the author for it now. But it's set in Victorian London, and it's the central character is a gay protagonist. He's former rent boy and now living with this rich guy who's got rich on the back of crime throughout London, whether it's prostitution, drugs dealing, body trafficking, whatever, people trafficking. And it's a really, really good read. It's kind of he's kind of Peaky Blinders in style, I suppose. And I hang on, for goodness sake, why am I being asked Bill or Ben, Ali? Bill or Ben or weed? I'd go for weed, I guess. I'd be the one in the middle. Make of that what you will. I like twins, actually. God, right. So, a quick story about that. A friend of mine in New York, who's originally from California, is married to a guy who's originally from Egypt, and he has a twin, and they're both in America. And so David was, I ought to anonymize this, I suppose. Anyway, he was with his husband downtown New York one Saturday, and this guy came up to his husband and said, "Hey, thanks for last weekend. Great weekend. That was amazing." And David's husband looks, sorry, I don't know you. I've never met you before. And then they realized that it was his twin brother that this guy had been with. And that was a big surprise because at the time he didn't know his twin brother was gay. And that caused quite an upset in the family at the time. But it was a genuine story that, and one day I'd like to put that as a story in a book. Now I've just given it away to all these authors. Never mind. But actually genuine story. Oh, thank you, Niece. Niece or Nis? I'm sorry. You're saying I've got a soothing voice. I've been told I put people to sleep. I hope not. Oh man, we could do some sexy MM writing with him as a lead character. Who? Is that me? No. I think you must be talking about somebody else, Jack. Repressed passion. You have a beautiful tone to your voice. Thank you, Louisa. That's lovely. I love the cover to this novel. Yeah, it's gorgeous, isn't it? That was my wonderful publisher, Burroughs, who sorted that out. And it's just perfect. And all that intelligence whispering in your ear. Okay. You can't beat the posh boy. Hello. Sexual animals. Ooh, grow. Sounds quality is amazing. Do you narrate, David? So, Jack, this is a plug for my first and latest, I ought to say, rather than my first audiobook. And it's out now. And I narrated my first novel, The Necessary Deaths. And I did it myself because I've got an ego, I suppose. But actually, I had listened to quite a few people on ACX and really liked their voices. And then Luke kept saying, "You used to read the news on the radio. Why on earth don't you read it yourself?" And I said, "Yeah, but a newsreader is different to telling a story because you have to perform a story. You've got to do accents and build up tension and suspense." And Luke said, "Well, what you've got to lose?" And he was right. So I did. And I've had lots of really nice comments. My head's going to explode in this room in a minute. But I did, and I was quite surprised. I genuinely was quite surprised. Luke will tell you I'm the first person to hate being in this position, not only in front of a microphone, but actually in front of a camera as well. I'm so awkward. Luke's a natural performer, and I love nothing better than being behind the camera, behind the microphone, producing or directing. But yeah, I've now starting to offer myself on ACX as a narrator because I've discovered I find it really good fun. And this is a bit of a lash up in here. I'm using a high quality microphone, but it's not the greatest space. There is a studio which I would normally use just down the road from me here in Tame, but of course it's all locked down at the moment. And that's what I use for narrating books, and it's properly soundproofed and sounds tremendous. Right, I'll quickly go through all these comments and then I'm going to read again. Who made those rules up? I don't know. I can see your handcuffs. Hello. I don't know where you're going with that, Ellie. Looking behind me nervously. They're upstairs. They're not, they're not down here. Louisa, I love Morse. Yes, me too. My mother keeps watching. They had endless reruns on ITV3, and loves watching them. She knows all the plot lines. It tells you, oh, this is going to happen, that's going to happen, but she still loves them. MC Beaton was very funny. She hated. Oh, did she? Oh, that was with. What was the name of the actor? He played the baddie in a Bond film. I thought he was really good in it. That's a shame. Hello. Oh, it's Susan. Hello. Hello. The Affair of the Porcelain Dog. Ira Adler by Jess Faraday. Thank you so much, Louisa. Jess Faraday. It's a really good book. And actually, if you get it on Audible, it's narrated by Philip Batley, and who's a really good narrator. He's also been in Downton, and he's very sexy. But he's a really excellent narrator, and I listened to his narration of it. So yes, it's The Affair of the Porcelain Dog, written by Jess Faraday. And I've got to read the sequels now, because Ira Adler is a really good protagonist, and he then goes off to America, I think, in the sequels. Peaky Blinders is more in my area. Okay, Jack. Now you're talking to each other, and that's not fair. You've got to talk to. It's a gorgeous cover. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Susan. You have a fabulous. Thank you. Leaky Blinders. Ooh. Burroughs Rock. It's true. They really do. And they're all in lockdown there in California at the moment. Now I'm going to quickly skip through these narrated. Going to have a wander over to Audible. Thank you, Jack. Please do. Robert Carlyle. Thank you so much, Sue. That was his name. And I think he's the most brilliant actor. I really think he's incredible. There are witnesses too. He said it, and there are witnesses too. Okay. So, on to book 2, which is called For the Love of Luke. Hi, Emma. Hey, good to see you. I put it there, then it can be seen. I would be rubbish at daytime television, wouldn't I? I can't actually get the props in the right place where the camera is. Right, there it is. Should be looking at the camera. So, For the Love of Luke, which is a mystery, romantic suspense, I guess you'd call it, and that it has triggers in it. And when I was choosing the passage to read today, I had to think about that, because it's about a subject which is I'm very passionate about, which is gay conversion therapy, which I'm very angry about is still legal in the UK, in this country, astonishingly. And I wrote this story because I don't know if some of you might know, I sing in the London Gay Men's Chorus, and I discovered that a couple of guys there had actually, oh, thank you, Stephanie, that's lovely. I love For the Love of Luke. A couple of guys in the chorus had experienced gay conversion therapy. And in the opening of the book, I've dedicated it to a guy called Tinyu Liu, who is a wonderful, elegant, very tall, amazing drag queen who's in the chorus. He's also an architect by day. And he told me about his experiences going through gay conversion therapy, which I've gone silent. Oh dear. If I keep talking, back now. Oh, right. Okay. Was it me that went silent, or was it you, or who, whatever? I do have dodgy internet here just occasionally. I think they, oh Lord, gay conversion therapy, that needs banning here. Yeah, absolutely right. So that's in the story, and also suicide is in the story as well. So I have to be careful that there are triggers there. So the piece that I've chosen today doesn't cover that. It doesn't involve that, but it does involve a funny section of the book, which I quite enjoyed writing. So briefly, For the Love of Luke is about a British or BBC television journalist called Rupert Pendley Evans, who lives on the ground floor of an apartment in South London and near Vauxhall. And at the first chapter of the book, he finds water flooding into his apartment from the upstairs apartment. When he goes up there, he finds this gorgeous man who turns out to be called Luke Diamond, who's unconscious in the bathroom. And all right, thank you, Jack. And I'm not quite there. And there's something very strange about Luke. He can't remember anything of his life before he arrived in London. And the book uncovers that mystery as to what actually happened to him. And through it, Rupert Pendley Evans and Luke get it on. And, oh, did you, Ali? You grew up in Vauxhall. Actually, I remember you telling me that once before. So presumably you've been to the Royal Vauxhall Tavern once or twice, which also features in this book. And I'm very proud to say that I performed on the stage of the Royal Vauxhall Tavern as well with the London Gay Men's Chorus. It's a great part of London. The Royal Vauxhall Tavern, in case anybody doesn't know of it, is a pub in Vauxhall, which is the oldest continuously open gay venue in London, if not in England, I think. An amazing place. And now that you see all of the concrete and steel tower blocks up in Vauxhall, and then buried in amongst them is this old tavern, seriously, an old tavern, two-storey tavern. And they nearly knocked it down a few years ago. Unfortunately, they got a preservation order on it, and it stays there. And it's the venue where so many drag artists started out. Lily Savage, just name one of them, over the years. And I thoroughly recommend you go there sometime just for a fantastic fun. Yep, but I used it as the inspiration for a condemned pub in one of my books. Oh, right, okay. Fortunately, Royal Vauxhall Tavern isn't condemned, and maybe one day we might get the Black Cat open in Camden as well. So, Rupert Pendley Evans and Luke Diamond, and at one point in the book, they have to escape London because Luke is threatened, and you have to read the book to find out why. And they go to Rupert's parents' place, which is out in leafy Buckinghamshire. And Rupert is posh, you can tell by the hyphenated name. People with hyphenated names have got to be posh. And Rupert's parents are posh, and they live in this grand house called Pendley House. And they're called Cynthia and Clarence, which are my parents' names. My mum is still alive, Cynthia is still alive. And my dad was called Clarence. He hated the name, and he changed it to Terry because he didn't like to be called Clarence. But they're actually the names of my parents, which I used for these two. I'll get on to this, and I'll quickly, if I've got time at the end, tell a story. But let me read the sequence first. Right. So they're at Pendley House, escaped from whatever threat there was in London. The afternoon sun burned down relentlessly on the brown, parched lawns at Pendley House. Lying under the shade of a willow tree, close to the small stream that crossed the estate, Luke was pleasantly exhausted by the heat. He'd stripped to the waist and wore a pair of faded khaki shorts Rupert had lent him. His head rested on Rupert's chest, and he stared up into the canopy of the willow tree. Rupert's arms lay across his chest, his thumb hooked into the waistband of Luke's shorts. "Is it always this hot in Britain?" asked Luke, batting away a wasp drawn to the remains of their picnic. "I thought it rained a lot." "Oh no," said Rupert. "We're a tropical country, really. We just put these stories of lousy weather around to keep the crazy Americans out." Luke rolled over to squat astride Rupert. He grabbed Rupert's arms and pinned them to the ground. "Well, you failed with this particular crazy American." He inclined his head to kiss Rupert's bare chest. You'll have to find another tactic to get rid of me. You can see my American accent shifts around all 50 states in one sentence. Rupert wriggled free from Luke's grasp and started to tickle him around the waist. Luke fell back onto the grass and pulled his knees to his chest. His face was contorted with laughter. No, no, he cried. I surrender. Anything but that. Rupert relented. He rolled over and laid his head on Luke's chest. Luke reached down and gently massaged Rupert's nipple. Oh, wow. I don't think that's a good idea, said Rupert, and he exhaled deeply. Not this close to the house, anyway. You know what that does to me. What if Mother hears? Luke turned to look at the rear of Pendley House. It was a huge Victorian Gothic structure with extravagant castellated walls and turrets at either end of the building. A vast conservatory, probably built in the 20th century, opened onto a veranda. This led to a formal garden and then to the lawns on which Luke and Rupert lay, close to the stream. It's nearly 100 yards to the house, protested Luke. He turned back to Rupert. Are you getting bashful, Rupert Pendley Evans? And I thought you were such an experienced man. Then you go all coy as soon as Mom and Pop are nearby. Luke took Rupert's nipple firmly in his fingers and began to massage it. Rupert groaned in appreciation and grasped Luke's wrist. No, no, said Rupert again. Not here. I just don't think they're quite ready for all this yet. Oh, I don't know, replied Luke. He intertwined his fingers with Rupert's. Your Mom's been real sweet to me today. She chatted and asked me about stuff. What stuff? Asked Rupert. Oh, you know, where I'm from and what I do, how long we've known each other, when we're going to get married and whether we're going to have kids. This time it was Rupert who rolled on top of Luke. He placed his arms on Luke's chest and rested his head on them. You can't joke about stuff like that. Not the way my parents are. I'm sure Mother's still waiting for me to grow out of my little phase, as she'd probably call it. Luke reached forward to kiss Rupert, then lay back on the grass and gazed up at the willow branches. The trees' green leaves dappled the blue of the sky. I wouldn't be so sure, replied Luke after a moment of contemplation. She seemed pretty cool with me today. I like her. She might be more modern than you think. Modern? Rupert sat up. Modern? You've got to be kidding. Nothing's modern in Middle Claydon. You're trapped in ye old England here, my dear deluded American. Rupert stood up and held out his hand to Luke. Come on, let's go for a walk. I'm going to show you something. Rupert pushed open the gate and gestured Luke through. They entered the churchyard and Rupert closed the gate behind him. The late afternoon sun reflected off the yellow sandstone of All Saints' Church and gave it a look of burnished gold. The two men paused to admire the building. A square tower at the east end had buttresses at either corner. The main body of the church extended to the west. There were narrow, slit-like windows and a shallow, sloping roof. Gee, it's beautiful, said Luke. This is why I could never think of Mother as modern, said Rupert. This is part of our heritage, and she's fiercely proud of it. Huh, well, she sure should be. I'd guess 13th century, maybe 14th. Post-Norman, anyway. The start of European Gothic. What the Victorians tried to copy 500 years later. Rupert looked at Luke and raised his eyebrows. You know your stuff. Yeah, well, replied Luke. Don't assume all Americans are dumb when it comes to history. Come on, I want to see inside. One of the advantages of being part of the Pendley Evans family, said Rupert, as they arrived at the imposing oak entrance door of the church, is that we have keys to the churches around the estate. He pulled a large black wrought-iron key from his pocket and inserted it in the lock. That's strange. Seems like I didn't need it. Someone must be here already. He pushed open the heavy door and they stepped into the church. The sudden drop in temperature as they entered contrasted with the late afternoon heat. Luke shivered. The building smelled of floor polish and mustiness, like a second-hand bookstore. A shaft of light flooded through the west window and glinted off the golden cross and candlesticks on the altar ahead of them. Oh my, said Luke. This is something else. I was christened in this church, said Rupert. So was every generation of my family. It's actually part of the Claydon House estate. My family was too poor to have its own church. You gotta be kidding, said Luke. Well, more likely too mean, acknowledged Rupert. This church was originally adopted by the Verney family. They've been in Middle Clayton since the 1600s. Wow, said Luke. I guess that beats you guys. Oh, yes. The Pendley Evanses are new money by comparison. My many-greats-grandfather made his fortune from slavery in the 18th century. He bought the farm, I guess, to try to gain respectability. No shit, said Luke. What's it like to be the descendant of a man who exploited my ancestors? Rupert shrugged. Not great. But there's not a lot I can do about it. By contrast, the Verneys were good people. I'll show you. He closed the door behind him and led Luke down the central aisle of the church. They walked past rows of wooden pews until they reached one near the front. Rupert stopped and invited Luke to sit. Rupert sat alongside him and pointed to a plaque fixed to the pew opposite. That's where Lady Verney would have sat with her husband, Sir Henry Verney. He was a Liberal Member of Parliament for this area in Victorian times, and alongside them would sit Lady Verney's sister, Florence Nightingale. You mean the lady with the lamp? Asked Luke. No way. That's right. The founder of modern nursing and the Red Cross was a regular here. Is it true she was gay? Asked Luke. Again, Rupert looked at Luke with astonishment. Your history's amazing. He leaned back against the pew. It's difficult to say. Lesbians didn't officially exist in Victorian Britain. The Victorians refused to believe a woman could love another woman. But in Florence's writings, people say she made it pretty clear she loved women. Luke put his arm around Rupert's neck. Rupert turned, and Luke kissed him slowly on the lips. Thank you, Rupert, he said. This is just so perfect. I really don't want this to end. And it doesn't have to, said Rupert. He kissed Luke again. There you are, darlings, said a voice from the front of the church. Are you boys having a nice time? Oh, bloody hell, Rupert gasped. Mother must be here with the flower committee. Luke followed his glance to the altar. Rupert's mother had brought in a large armful of flowers and placed them on the floor. Rupert stood up and stepped into the aisle of the church. Come on, he whispered to Luke. I really don't want to stick around. Oh, don't be like that, Luke whispered back. She's just being friendly. I'll just finish arranging these, said Lady Pendley Evans in a loud voice, and then we can walk back together. No way, Rupert hissed in a low voice. Oh, don't be so mean to her, Luke said. She's trying real hard to be friendly. But Rupert ignored him and stalked back down the aisle of the church. Lady Pendley Evans looked up when the main door slammed shut. Oh dear, she said. Rupert's in an awful hurry again. Luke, darling, could you possibly give me a hand with these? The vases are terribly heavy. Luke stood and joined her by the altar. You know, said Lady Pendley Evans, Rupert's being most awfully silly about all this. I've watched you two today. Rupert's the happiest I've seen him for years. She turned to Luke and fixed him with a clear, unblinking gaze. You're the best thing that's happened to my son in a long time. Luke was taken aback. He hadn't expected to hear this from Rupert's mother. Lady Pendley Evans, he began. Please, call me Cynthia. We really don't need to be so formal. Well, Cynthia, Luke corrected himself. Rupert thinks you don't approve of him for... Being gay? Asked Cynthia. Oh, that's ridiculous. Well, like all mothers, I just want my son to be happy. Rupert's father and I took a dim view of his gallivanting around, sowing his wild oats hither and thither, but maybe you can finally bring some common sense and stability into his life. Luke laughed. Gee, I never thought I'd hear myself being described as someone who could bring common sense. Why on earth not? Interrupted Cynthia. You seem like a sensible fellow. Rupert needs to settle down. But Rupert was angry because you didn't want us to sleep together in the house last night. Oh, what a lot of nonsense. Cynthia's laugh was hearty and deep, like a man's. I remember when Clarence and I were courting. The last thing we wanted was to sleep in the big house with his ghastly parents. What if they'd heard us having rumpy-pumpy? Luke couldn't believe his ears. Don't look so surprised, young man, said Cynthia. We might be dried-up old prunes now, but Clarence and I could go all night in our younger days. We always stayed in the old cottage. So much more sensible. Clarence is awfully noisy in the bedroom department. That's why I put you two down there rather than in Rupert's room. She knelt to pick up a long iris stem and began to strip leaves from the lower part of its stalk. Now, be a dear and fetch me one of those large vases over there. She peered up at Luke and gave him a knowing look. We can let Rupert have his little sulk while we have a lovely chat together, can't we? So there we go. I've got to flick back through the comments now. Excuse me a minute whilst I... oh, golly. You have been typing. Crikey, which is... oh, hang on. I grew up in... Let's play... yep, no, sorry, I'm... Radical Hearts. Oh, yes. The Condemned Pub. I do a good American accent. You're very sweet, but I think it moved around a few states. Laugh out loud at the American. I've heard worse. All right, thank you. David, can you vary your English dialects when you narrate? West Midlands. Okay, so here's the story, Jack. I used to live in Birmingham, you know, and used to get the buzz when you go out to Wolverhampton. I worked at the BBC, a place called Pebble Mill in those days in Birmingham, and you used to have to go out with a tape recorder in those days on the radio and interview people in the street, and they're called Vox Pops. And it's so difficult interviewing people from Birmingham, and I don't mean to disparage, I've got lots of lovely friends in the West Midlands, but it's quite a negative sounding accent. So you ask somebody what they think of something, and they say, well, it's all right, really. and you try to make them sound jolly, and they say, well, it's all right, really, you know, just could be better. And so, yes, I can do some, and then others I can't. When I was doing reading, rather, The Necessary Deaths, one of the characters has a Manchester accent, because I thought that would be easier to do, because my mother's from Manchester originally. But I could not read it if I was reading the rest of the book, so I had to read all of those bits separately and edit them in afterwards. So I sort of can, Jack, but not completely. Which is harder though, West Midlands or Leeds? Well, Leeds is just the Yorkshire accent, isn't it? The Archer. We have lots of bad accents here in the States. Oh, golly. Okay, oh, hang on. Something's flicking up. Right, I got it. See, we can't tell. We go tone deaf to any accents but the several thousands of ours. Yeah, actually, American accents are really interesting once they get into them. And there are some fascinating resources online as well to hear people from all the different states being interviewed and asked to say things in their particular dialects. I'm good at London and Common. Oh, right, okay. Excellent at Common London. Thank you, Ali. Hardest is between Staffordshire and Brummie. Yes, I'd have to hear a Staffordshire accent. A trick that I was told by an actor friend of mine was, I thought you sounded a little bit Scouse. Ooh, oh, right. Oh, Jack. Oh, okay. It's going to be a whole different... Staffordshire. Yeah, which bit of Staffordshire? I lived in... Where did I live? One of the pottery towns for about 2 months once. And it's a whole other world. It's like it's cut off from the rest of the world. My landlady there, I was visiting friends then in Birmingham in an evening often, and my landlady said, oh, I go to Birmingham Christmas time, and that was it. How many novels do you have available, David? I have 4 in total, and I'm writing the 5th one in the shed at the bottom of the garden, and hopefully having it ready soon. He narrated his own audiobook. It's brilliant. I love it. Oh, golly. Emma, I love you. I really do. I mean, how many novels he's published today? Oh, right, okay. Novels, right. I love Rumpy Pumpy. Love it. Thank you, Murky. Does Rumpy Pumpy clearly does translate to America? I just wanted to know. Great reading. Got to shoot off now, but all right. Thank you ever so much. We're a chatty bunch. A quick story and then I'll go. But thank you so much for this opportunity, everybody. Love it, undertone to each way it goes. Quick story about For the Love of Luke. So my partner's called Luke. And this book came out 2 years ago, no, a couple of years ago. It was 2 years ago, that's right. So I just finished the manuscript for this and sent it off to my publisher then. And it was Christmas time. and I had a date. I met this guy online, and we decided to meet at a pub in Soho, Compton's. And there I was sat at the bar, and he turns up eventually, and we get chatting, and then he tells me his name's Luke. And I said, "Oh my God, I can't believe it! I've just written a book, and the central character is called Luke." And so 6 months later, I suppose, we were still going out after that. And then the book comes out. So, of course, everybody says, "Oh, that's sweet. You named him after Luke." And I said, "No, no, it was named Luke when I wrote the book a year ago." Um, but from then on, everybody just believes that I named the book after Luke. Anyway, I'll shut up there now. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been great fun. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I shall put those links in that I promised on this page. And Jack, are you still on? Can you say who's going to be the next reader? Because I, for the life of me, can't remember who it's going to be, but I would give them a plug if I could, if you can type the name down. But otherwise, I'll say look out for the next reading because they're great to listen to, and it's lovely to hear authors read their own books. But for the moment, keep safe, everybody, wherever you are, and let's hope we're not locked down forever and that we can all get together at some event in the distant future, or the near future even. All right, I'm going to cut off now. See you. Bye-bye.